There is something you've been doing for years that you believe is keeping you safe. You don't call it fear. You call it being realistic. You call it patience. You call it waiting for the right time. And the longer you wait, the more that waiting starts to feel like wisdom. There is something you've been doing for years that you believe is keeping but. Here is what no one tells you. The version of you that exists 10 years from now is being built right now, quietly, without your permission, by the choices you keep making on autopilot. And the most dangerous part isn't what you are doing wrong, it's that most of it feels completely reasonable. You wake up, you do the things that need doing, you handle what's in front of you. And somewhere in the movement of daily life, you tell yourself a story. That you are building something, that the momentum will come, that the clarity you need is just around the corner. That's where it starts. Not with failure, with a convincing illusion of forward motion. If I could go back and stand in front of the person I was, early 20s, full of energy, completely certain I understood how the game worked, the first thing I would skip isn't a habit or a decision. It's a posture, a way of standing in relation to time. I treated time like it was abundant, like there was always a later where I could recalibrate, course correct, become the person I meant to become. I spent enormous energy being busy, genuinely busy, while avoiding the one thing that required real stillness. Confronting whether I was building the right life, or just building a convincing version of a life. The first thing I'd skip is the performance of progress. The checking of boxes, the collecting of credentials, experiences, and relationships that looked like momentum but were, in truth, elaborate ways of staying comfortable while telling myself I was moving forward. It doesn't feel like avoidance when you are inside it. It feels like work ethic. The second thing I'd skip is harder to name, because it lives so deep in the architecture of who you think you are that it stops feeling like a choice at all. You are optimizing for approval. Not in the obvious way, not the desperate kind that's easy to recognize and dismiss. In the quiet kind. The kind where you edit yourself before you speak. Where you shape your ambitions around what can be explained to other people. Where you make decisions by running them, first, through an internal committee of imaginary critics. I did this for years without knowing I was doing it. I thought I was being thoughtful. I thought I was being strategic. What I was actually doing was filtering every real impulse through a layer of anticipated judgment. And by the time any desire survived that filter, it was so diluted, so softened, so pre-approved that it didn't really belong to me anymore. The psychological cost of this isn't visible in the moment. It accumulates in the background, like a slow leak. You start to notice it years later when you realize that you've built a life that's deeply legible to everyone around you and somehow hollow to you. When the accomplishments arrive and don't land the way you expected. When the praise comes and passes through you like light through glass. That hollowness isn't depression, it's misalignment. And the longer you defer it, the more expensive it becomes to correct. By the time I understood the third thing I'd skip, it had already done most of its damage. It's this: the refusal to let people see you failing. Not the dramatic, visible failures. Those you can control the narrative around. I mean the chronic, low-grade concealment of struggle, the practiced composure, the way you learn to present the edited version of your interior life to almost everyone, including the people closest to you. What this creates, what it quietly, slowly creates, is a life where no one actually knows you. Not because you're dishonest, but because you've become so skilled at managing perception that authenticity starts to feel dangerous, vulnerable, naive, and so you become unknowable, not intentionally, but functionally. The relationships you build are with a version of you that you've constructed for public consumption, and somewhere underneath that, the real version, uncertain, unfinished, genuinely afraid sometimes, starts to feel like a secret, like something to be protected rather than expressed. The problem isn't loneliness exactly. The problem is that you become a stranger to yourself in the presence of other people, and that estrangement compresses over time into something that's very difficult to reverse. I would have skipped the armor, not because vulnerability is noble, but because the armor is so heavy, and you don't feel the weight of it until you've been carrying it for so long that you can't remember what it felt like not to. The fourth thing I'd skip is the belief that discipline and suffering were somehow related. That if something felt hard, it meant it mattered. That if something came easily, it was suspect. This sounds almost too simple to have caused damage, but follow it long enough and it becomes a filter for your entire life. You start to distrust joy. You start to associate ease with laziness. You override your instincts, the ones that are telling you clearly, sometimes loudly, that something isn't right. Because you've trained yourself to believe that discomfort is virtue. You grind through relationships that aren't working. You stay in environments that are slowly diminishing you, not because you are afraid to leave, but because part of you believes that if it's painful, it must be building something, that the suffering is doing work. Sometimes it is, but not always. And being unable to tell the difference is its own form of self-destruction. The fifth thing is the one I've spent the longest sitting with, because it doesn't reveal itself as a mistake until very late. Sometimes not until it's already irreversible. I spent years optimizing the wrong timeline. Planning for a future self who had more certainty, more resources, more readiness, and living as though the present version of me was a rough draft, provisional, subject to revision. What I couldn't understand until I had lived enough life to see the pattern clearly is that the present version of you isn't a rough draft. It's the only draft that actually exists. The future self you are waiting to become is being constructed entirely from the choices the present self makes. And if the present self is always in waiting mode, always preparing, always almost ready, then the future self inherits that same posture. The waiting becomes the identity. There are no clean resolution to offer you here. That's not what this is. What I can tell you is that recognizing these things, really recognizing them not intellectually but viscerally in the way that makes your chest feel tight, doesn't make them easy to change. The patterns are old, they're load-bearing, they're woven into the way you talk, the way you make decisions, the way you interpret what's happening to you on an ordinary Tuesday. Knowing what you'd skip doesn't let you skip it retroactively. That's not how time works. That's not how humans work. But T here is something that shifts when you stop pretending these things aren't true. When you stop waiting for the version of yourself that has it figured out. When you let the people around you see a little more of what's actually happening inside you. When you stop treating suffering as proof of commitment and ease as evidence of failure, what shifts isn't comfort. What shifts is contact. A slightly more honest relationship with your own life. A slightly smaller gap between who you are and who you are pretending to be. That gap is where most of the damage lives, and it doesn't close all at once. It closes in the small, uncomfortable moments where you choose differently than you would have before. You are reading this at a particular point in your life. Whatever age you are, whatever you've built or failed to build, there is still a gap between the life you are living and the life that is actually available to you. The question is simply whether you are willing to stop pretending the distance isn't there.